It's Mr. Lee, and today what I'm going to do is show you how to create a cookie cutter. We are going to use a couple different types of software. We're going to use Adobe Photoshop, and we're going to also use Adobe Illustrator. And the third piece of software we're going to use is Tinkercad. It's a online CAD software. You can also use something like Onshape or other types of software, but Tinkercad is the simplest to do this. The first thing I'm going to do is look for an image, and the image that I want to look for is going to be fairly simple. It's going to have a pretty good simple border that we can use to make for the edges of our cookie cutter. The image that I found is the St. Olaf shield logo. So I'm going to download that image. I right click on it and save image as. And it's a PNG file, which will work in both Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. So that's a good file type. I'm going to name it St. Olaf shield logo. I don't like putting spaces in because that just tends to do funny things when you bring in files when you're manipulating them. I'm going to save this to my desktop. Then the next step that I'm going to do is open it up in Adobe Photoshop. When I do that, the reason I'm opening it up is so that I can take all the color out of it. So if you really want to simplify things, you want to find an image that is really just black and white. What I'm going to do next now is go down to the corner here, and I want to change the black part of that image to white, and then the gold part I want to change to black. So if I hit this double arrow here, it brings white up to the front. Then I go to the paint bucket. It's usually a gradient tool, so you have to click on it and then drop down to the paint bucket. When I click the black, it'll change it to white. So I'm going to just select everything that's black. If I hit the Control and the plus key or the Command and the plus key, that zooms in. So I can change that, and then Command or Control and the minus key zooms out. Now what I need to do is change the gold to black. So this double arrow is kind of handy again. I can just switch to the black part of the palette. And I'm still on the paint bucket tool, so I'm just going to drop the black in to all the places that are gold. And then this is ready to save. So I don't even need to change the file type. I'm just going to hit File Save, and that'll save it as a PNG file, and it's saved to my desktop. So now that colored image that I had downloaded is now a black and white image. What I'm going to do next is bring it into Illustrator, because what I want to do is turn it into a vector file. And Illustrator allows us to do that. I go up to File and then New. And I already have some presets. You'll notice that I have a preset that's 12 by 12, so I'm going to select that one. It's color mode isn't important. I always do high raster effects, and my width and height is 12 by 12. My cookie cutter is not going to be that big, though. It'd be pretty big cookies. The next thing I'm going to do is hit the Control or Command key and then the R key. That turns on the ruler. And then the Control or Command key and the quote key turns on the grid. That gives me a frame of reference for when I'm bringing in my images. Now, if you haven't done this, you want to go up to Window and Workspace and make sure that Essentials Classic is turned on. If you do that, that gives you information like the stroke and some other information in this top menu. So the next thing is to do File and then Place. And I'm going to grab that image. It's on my desktop. It's at the top. I sort things by date modified, then it's easier to find. And hit Place. And what I'm going to do right now is, it's pretty small image, so I'm going to kind of make it bigger. If I hold the shift key as I drag the corner, it drags both the X and Y proportionally. Or I can go into the transform window. So you go to window and then down to transform. You can highlight that. It's also over on the side here. And click this link. That links the width and height. And I want to make this kind of a standard width and height. So I'm going to do 6 for the height. And you notice it changed the width to like 5.1843. I'm going to copy that for later. Next thing what I'm going to do is image trace it. So if you hit the down arrow, you have all these different choices, but we just need to do a default image trace. So I'll just hit default, and it does it very fast. Then I have to hit expand. And what that's done in the layers is it's created these different elements. Now, there's some of them that I don't need. For example, the white triangles here and here and here. So I'm going to right click on this and isolate it, and then select that white and hit the delete key, and that will take out those elements. I'm going to do the same thing here. Looks like that one's already gone. So now I have this image that has been turned into a vector file. I'm going to expand the layers, because the one that I'm kind of interested in is this compound path right here. What I'm going to do is turn off all the other paths right now, because I don't really need them for the moment, and just kind of focus on that. I want to copy that, and I'm going to create a new file for that. So I'm going to go Control or Command and copy. And then I'm going to do a new file, and we're in Illustrator again. I'm going to just make a new 12 by 12 print file, and I'll turn on the rulers and turn on the grid again. And then I'm going to paste in, so I'll do Control or Command and V, and that pasted that in. It's the same size as the one that I just had, and that's good, because this part I'm going to kind of manipulate some of this stuff and take out some of this inside border. You notice when it's highlighted, the outside and the inside line is highlighted. So if I zoom in, you can kind of see that. They're both highlighted, but I don't want all that. So I'm going to right click on this and release the compound path. And you notice what it does is it creates two different paths. There's this, I'm going to turn it off. That's the inside path, and then this is the outside path. So I'm gonna get rid of the inside path, just turn it off. And what I'm gonna do with this now is I'm gonna go over to our stroke and fill, and I'm gonna hit this double arrow, and that swapped it. So now I have this black line. What I'm going to do now is do an offset path. So I'm going to go up to Object and then Path, and I have to select it before I do that. So I select it, Object, Path, and then Offset Path. Only you notice it made it bigger. I don't want it bigger. I want this smaller. So I'm going to, instead of, I like that thickness, but instead of it being an offset path that's plus, I'm going to put a minus sign in there, and then click OK, and that'll drop the offset path to the inside. That looks pretty good. So this is going to be kind of the border that I'm going to extrude. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a file, and I think I'm going to need to export it, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this and open it up in Photoshop, and in between those two stroke lines I want to fill it black, because I'm going to extrude that in Tinkercad. So I'm going to label this St. Olaf shield border. And PNG is fine. It's saving it to my desktop. So I'm going to hit export and then OK. Now I'm going to hop back to this other one right now and turn on these other lines, that all this other stuff that we had turned off. This one's pretty much ready to go. You remember that I'm kind of looking at this height and width. I need to kind of keep those the same. And I'm going to go up to Object and then Artboards and Fit to Artwork Bounds. And then I'm going to save this as my as a SVG file. So what an SVG file is a scaled vector graphics file. And I have to do that. I think it's in the export. So we're going to go to export and export as. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. And then the format, I can drop down and go SVG. I'm going to name it St. Olaf Shield logo. But now it's an SVG file, so it won't overwrite anything else, and I'm saving it to my desktop. And just hit save again. So that's ready to go in Tinkercad. Now what I have to do is open up that border in Photoshop. So I'm going to go here and do File, Open, and then I'm going to look for the border, which is this one. I'm going to open that up. And you notice that it has the two stroke lines, but what I want to do is fill in between those. So I'm going to have black up front. I'm going to select the fill tool, and then what I'm going to do is just fill that in. And that's pretty much ready to go. So what I can do is do a file, and we need to, I think we can do this here. We might be able to export it as an SVG file here. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Looks like you can't here, so I'm not going to export it there, but I will just hit File and Save. And now what I'm going to do is open this back up in Illustrator. So that one I don't need anymore. I don't even need to save it. So, but I am going to open up the file that I created, that part, that stroke, that, and I'll probably do a new file, 12 by 12 again. And then I'll turn on the ruler and the grid lines. And then I'm going to do File and Place. And I'm going to go back to that border PNG file and place that back in. And you notice over here it's about the same size that it was originally, so that's good. I have to image trace it, expand it. I'm going to get rid of these, the white stuff again, so I'm going to right click on that to isolate it and then delete out all that part. Now what I can do is fit to artboard, the artwork bounds, and then export this as an SVG file. And I can do that in Illustrator because Illustrator creates vector files. Photoshop doesn't necessarily always do that. It'll, if you open up a vector file, you can save it as a vector file, but sometimes you can't convert it. So I'm going to name this one, let's see, St. Olaf Shield border done, because I'm finished with it. And that's a SVG file. So what I'll be able to do now is bring those both into Tinkercad. So I'm going to pause this here and then start a new recording where we bring those images into Tinkercad.